All right, I think we're ready to go. I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Budget and Finance Committee of the Whole meeting. Today's Thursday, June 15th, 2023. And I believe we start with introductions. I guess I should, sorry, this is my first budget meeting that I'm chairing. So I'm the co-chair, Anna Brawley, and then Assembly member / vice chair Meg Zalatel is the co-chair. She is excused today. So let's go around and do introductions of assembly members and staff.
George Martinez.
Felix Rivera. Zach Johnson.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Kevin Cross.
Christopher Constant.
Anna Brawley.
Daniel Walland.
Okay.
Courtney Peterson, Office of Management and Budget.
Dan Moore with Municipal Treasury.
Alden Thurn, Finance Department.
And then we have Desiree Camacho from the clerk's office passing out paper, and a few folks in the audience. So let's go ahead and get started. Sorry, we'll start with our new business. So first we have report from the Budget Advisory Commission. And I did get a communication from Chair Nolan Clauda that there is no report. The meeting did not happen in June for lack of quorum. And of course, we're still hoping to get that board fully staffed up. So unless Mr. Clauda is on the phone, I'm going to move on.
Excuse me, Chair, this is Member Perez Padilla. I'm on the phone.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I'll pause there too. Is there anyone else on the phone?
Jim Boyko from RBK.
So there's Ross. Ross is on the phone.
This is Ross Griswold, Public Finance Manager. I'm on the phone as well.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, and apologies for neglecting to recognize you before. So not hearing from anyone from the Budget Advisory Commission, let's move on to our next item, the ARPA grant distribution and funding update. I see we have Mr. Bird listed. Ms. Peterson, I don't know if you're speaking to this or.
Our ARPA administrator, who is Trista Espy in the mayor's office, the community engagement director had a prior commitment this morning, so she could not attend. If you guys have any specific questions about the ARPA funds, I can sure relay those to her and submit some answers to the body.
Okay, does anybody have questions? Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps I am behind the ball because I've missed a meeting or two of this committee. So the last time that I remember this coming up, the ARPA grants were paused. Are we no longer in a paused situation?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if there was a pause or just a catch up of changing of staff, but she's definitely actively working the distribution and having grant agreements signed and getting providers their funding.
Thank you.
Mr. Thurn?
So as an update, I have picked up the responsibility of submitting the quarterly reports, and the first quarter report was submitted last Friday. So I know that's a little bit delayed from when it was due, but we were able to complete that. There were a significant number of additional questions that we had to go out and ask the subrecipients to provide information on, 28 different subrecipients. So we were able to get that information in with use of our contractor, and everything as of the first quarter was put into, and we submitted the report. So we're in the process of getting ready now that the second quarter report here is coming up at the end of June, due by the end of July. So we're prepping for that as well as the annual report. So I'm hoping that we're going to start getting ahead of what the different work responsibilities and timelines are and so forth. But I know that there have been a lot of questions in the past about that quarterly report. So it is submitted. I believe it's available for people to even look at it now. So in case you get questions, as I know you tend to do, about where's it at and why it's not out there, it should be finalized and available to them.
Mr. Rivera, any follow-up?
I'm good. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Then, Mr. Thurn, could you cause that to be shared with all of us, the quarterly report? And then there was some conversation about what was loosely termed as an audit process for the grantees and the requirements and meeting those. And so would it be fair to assume that what you were suggesting about additional questions and getting more information is that, or is there a secondary process going on?
So there's going to be a secondary process that I'm working with Trista and Mario on. The questions that I was referring to were questions that were required to be answered by subrecipients in the first quarter that we had not gathered that information in the past. So that was kind of holding up the quarterly report from being submitted. So we have that information. The report's been submitted, and I'll send it to, I'll email it. And it's 50, 60 pages. It's quite extensive. The other stages that I am referring to, however, is we do have the next quarterly report and we have an annual report. And last year, our contractor produced the annual report with some guidance and information from the municipality. So we have to be able to do that. We're trying to prepare the accounting department to prepare the second quarter financials because we've lost many of those people in that department. So we're prepping for that. In addition to that, what I was referring to is there are additional requirements that we should be doing that as far as ensuring the subrecipients are spending the money appropriately and providing us invoices and backup and so forth. So that's one avenue that we're going to start looking into. Additionally, there's expected to be site visits as a part of the requirements from the Treasury, and we need to look into that. So there's a couple of areas that we need to start looking into that I believe need to be accomplished and may or may not be currently being done. So we're going to have to look into not only who's performing those functions, but also where's the funding coming to be able to accomplish that. So I'm trying to get my arms around all the requirements, and we're slowly getting up to speed here. But I was referring to the two additional areas of monitoring and compliance that we could do a little better on, that we need to look at.
Thank you. So just I'll editorialize and say my 6 years here have demonstrated that just by chance, perhaps you have landed in exactly the right place you need to be, because this sounds like a project for Alden.
I have a few projects right now, so.
Okay.
This one uniquely fits in that kind of what I've seen you do so well.
Okay, any other questions? I do have one quickly, just to follow up on that. So what is the general process if there is, I guess within the municipality, if there is an issue with a subgrantee after you've gone through this process?
Well, I'm sure that we work with our legal department, and they will prepare anything that needs to happen from a legal requirement. I'm more interested right now in the monitoring and compliance of those entities that are out there, and that if we're to be audited, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, as well as the subrecipients. However, if there are situations with subrecipients where some of the grants may have questions, there are grant agreements, and at that particular point, I think we'll work with our legal department to be able to analyze what the best course of action is on those.
Okay, thank you. Okay, not seeing any other questions, then thank you for that report. Let's move on to same person, different topic, the FEMA reimbursement. And then I'll direct folks to the one-page handout that we got with the update. Thanks. Go ahead.
Perfect. And I'll try to be real brief on this to give Dan as much time after Courtney here. So we had a pretty good month on money. So we got over 20 million. I think I had told you we had done really well with FEMA the prior 2 months. And then this last month, we were really successful with the state. So we were able to get 20 million in hand. So that brought our total up to 102 million out of the 126 that we expensed. We did have 2 very small projects get obligated, which was always good. I passed another one on this morning, so I expect another small one to be obligated in the next week or 2. And we've made really good progress on our 2 vaccine projects that are about a little over $2 million. So I fully expect those finally to get moving again now that we've been able to provide all the ancillary reporting documentation. So that leaves us basically from a FEMA perspective with the one project that's 2.3 million that deals with the July, August, and September of last year's sheltering. There are some challenges with that, and we're trying to work through what those might be. That's going to be a longer road to go to ultimately, hopefully, get that project obligated. And then the staff members over at the OEM department are working on those 2 forced labor projects that we've talked about. We need to get them submitted into the FEMA portal by June 29th. So they're currently working on that. So we're doing pretty good on FEMA. We finally got some money. We did get all of our obligating award documents for many of those other projects that the state hasn't paid us. So as soon as we get all our signatures back, we'll get those done. I would estimate 60 to 75 days after that, we'll get another 16 million from the state. With that, I will stop with any questions. We are on we're getting down there. We're starting at the end here for COVID.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from folks? Okay, I do have one on that one too. And again, just really basic, reminding everybody. So when we get money back, like we're getting from the state, because it's basically expenditures that we've made, I guess, where did the money that we paid come from to cover these things up front? And then where is it going back into?
So please do not think when I say we got money back that that's spendable money. And I think that's where your question is going. We have basically a savings account called the fund balance, and we took 126 million out of that. All we're trying to do is to get reimbursed to refill that spot that we had taken the money before. And we will not get all 126 million back, as we've discussed, but we're going to get as close to that as we possibly can. But that's where the money goes. It goes back into our fund balance account, and then can be invested by public finance through the different financing mechanisms that they have. But we've been negative fund balance for many years now, and as this money comes in, it helps to start moving us back towards that zero number that we're trying to get to, which we need to be higher than that because of our 10 and 2, but that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Thanks, Eldon. When do we expect our review from Moody's and the other bond ratings agencies in relationship to this conversation about filling back up the fund balance?
I would defer to Ross, who's on the phone, but I believe we go to the bond agencies late fall, early winter, but Ross is on the phone. He would have a better idea of when the bond rating agencies take advantage of that. Ross?
Thanks, Alden, and through the chair, this is Ross Griswold, Public Finance Manager. When each of our credits has a separate rating, and the rating that we're talking about here is the general obligation rating of the municipality. The other credits are for specific ratings for example, water utility, wastewater utility, port. that the general obligation rating of the municipality is currently on credit watch by Standard & Poor's. And we have a rating with Fitch Ratings as well. And that has a stable outlook. The outlook with S&P, as I mentioned, is actually a negative outlook. So they will get back to us on that when we go to market. The next time we go to market for GO bonds, which potentially would be in the fourth quarter of this year or the first quarter of 2024, depending on when we need to sell bonds to get cash. If we didn't sell bonds, we would have an obligation to come back to us and let us know and re-examine the negative outlook that they have. But we will probably go to market before that happens, before that timing kicks into place. And S&P will then address the negative outlook that we have on our rating at that time. Like I said, probably the fourth quarter of this year or first quarter of next year.
All right, thanks, because this is a substantially different picture than a year ago. And in their reports that they wrote to us, they said the fund balance concern was a very important concern. And this certainly paints a different picture than we had even just 12 months ago. So thank you.
To the chair, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Thompson, could you repeat that one more time for me?
I just was suggesting that it really looks like a different financial picture now that these were close to 118 million obligated, 102 in the bank back. And that was one of the cautions that they said last year, was that it was ultimately that fund balance issue that was their main concern. And so I look forward to the reevaluation is the gist.
That is, Mr. Chair, that is correct. Or Mr. Thompson, sorry. That is correct. That was their main concern, and it will be the main focus when they reevaluate us next time around. And so that's a correct observation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Martinez?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just for Alden, just to go back to something that you mentioned, just for clarification, if you could. You mentioned one of the outstanding projects was for $2 million or so for sheltering from July, August, and September last year, and you described that as maybe some challenges associated. Could you shed some light on to what you mean by that?
So we have a project at 681,325. It's about a third of the way down. It's PW 221 for $2,347,000. That's the project I was referring to. The state health order ended last June 30th or July 1st. And as such, that's the main order that we were under with FEMA in order to be able to qualify for non-congregate sheltering. At that particular time, I believe the board was looking to continue sheltering for non-congregate through the summer. And I believe the administration put forward a different funding source, and then the assembly overrode that and used FEMA as the funding source to pay for the non-congregate sheltering, which ended up being July, August, and September. Because we're not under a state health order, we had to qualify under our own municipal emergency, as well as request all of the items that we did not have to request before because we were under the states, such as we had to provide food, why do we have to do non-congregate, and all of these types of things. So we have submitted a project, has all the expenditures in there. They're all eligible expenditures, but they will not move it forward to obligation until we can prove to them through writing and hopefully a letter that we had a municipal health order in place and that we request non-congregate sheltering kind of like through the state to FEMA, where before we did not have to do that because the state was doing it already under the state order. And we've been going through many months of wranglings with the state on what that looks like and what we need to do to provide them sufficient request for that. And that's the area where we're still working on. Similar to the vaccinations, it's all this ancillary things that are outside of it that we have to do. This project is currently on hold because they're waiting for that, and we have to get FEMA ultimately to approve that non-congregate sheltering was allowed after the states ended the emergency last year, and we have not gotten that yet. And until we get FEMA to approve that, they're not going to finalize the project where those expenditures happen to be in.
Thank you.
Mr. Volin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask a question. I hope it doesn't take us too far down a rabbit hole, but while we're on the topic of fund balance and shelter, I think there's sort of an elephant in the room, and that is the recent item that some colleagues have brought forward, and then we had an S version. On the original item for funding of permanent low barrier shelter, specifically the Tudor and Elmore location. In the original version of that, the mayor is a co-sponsor. And so I guess my questions are, is it, number one, like, did previous CFO or acting CFO weigh in on that item? Did the mayor come to you for advice when it suggested that we use $7 million of fund balance, which what I'm hearing from you is that the fund balance is negative, and that if we go in the hole, whether it's $7 million or $11 million, that's going to negatively impact our bond rating. So the question that makes me ask is it the mayor's position that we should negatively impact our bond rating in order to get the Tudor and Elmore project finished? I know you can't speak on behalf of the mayor, but it sounds like if you could confirm for me that it is your advice that we not try to appropriate $7 to $11 million of fund balance, number one. And then number two, to your knowledge, did the mayor collaborate with either the former CFO or you as the acting CFO in working on that appropriation?
Through the chair, Mr. Voland, I have not had any conversations with the mayor with regards to this particular funding source that goes with that. I have had conversations with Grant, the prior CFO, so I can't say that whether there were conversations between the mayor and him. I'm not aware of that. Under the perfect world, we would know what the ending 2022 fund balance is. And I think everyone knows that we're behind on our financials at this particular point, and it's going to be a while before we're able to firm up that particular number. So when Grant and I speak about available funding and so forth, we're not using actual numbers, which is not a great finance position to be in. And we understand that for the assembly and administration as well. But we were significantly negative in fund balance, as everyone is aware. Last year, we were doing well in getting that fund balance replenished based upon the FEMA conversation, but we're not going to get all of it back, as we've discussed. So we don't have an idea that alone is going to be a zero situation. I believe there have been other things that have gone on, like earthquake, for example. That money gets spent, and we don't get any of that money back until the project is finished. So that eats into the fund balance as well. It's different than COVID from a FEMA perspective. So we spent more money on earthquake, so that negatively impacts your fund balance until a year, 2, 3 years before those projects are actually completed. So there's a variety of things that we're just using based upon where we were last year and what has occurred that gives us significant pause. And you see in the email that we responded to that we believe that when the numbers all come out and are finalized by the accounting department, that we expect that the fund balance will still be negative. Not to the degree it was last year by any stretch of the imagination, but still negative, which then puts you in a situation, if you're going to spend 7 or 11, it just sets you that much farther. And please remember, your goal is not to be at zero. Your goal is to be above zero, because you have a 10 and 2 requirement that you have to be able to live under, and we're below that even. So those are just the things that, unfortunately, we're giving you the best advice and guess that we can based upon where we are. Once the financials are done, we'll be much more clear. But we are unfortunately quite a ways away from getting those financials finalized this year, given all the issues that we're having. So that's where it's coming from. No conversations that I have had with the administration. And when we respond from Grant and I, that's just our best advice based upon what we started with and what has happened since that particular time period.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. If I could just follow up, I just hope, whatever sort of project for shelter we move forward with, if we go through the clean slate approach and, we are talking about different ideas, I think that is informative, and I hope my colleagues are taking that to heart, that there is less magic money than maybe we thought there was. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'll recognize Mr. Constant next. I'll also note we do have the Muni financial status as a general agenda item. So I guess I'll also suggest if we want to continue that conversation, let's do it then. But go ahead.
Yeah, when the time comes, probably not today, I would love a snapshot of the 10 and 2 and where we are after you anticipate we're fully reimbursed as much as we're going to be, if we're kind of getting close to that zone where we're under that, because that certainly has been the goal, to get back to that place. Period, full stop. And that's a benchmark we haven't really talked about. It's, yes, it's great to have above zero, but it's also, as you said, important to get back to having that 10 and 2 on reserve.
And we've had, I believe, a downgrade each of the last 2 years on our bonds. So that is affecting our interest rates. And we would love to get back up to that positive, super positive credit rating that we've had historically. And it would be great if we could move on. And this is Dan's last opportunity to really speak about the investment committee. It'd be great to get to him. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate we do have a very full agenda. I'll just make one quick observation on the FEMA. It does seem like when we're weighing, what was the cost benefit to the response that we had during COVID, I think on the one hand, it did impact our bond rating. So there's a cost to that. On the other hand, we're getting almost all of our funds back. And so there's trade-offs. I guess I'll just add that. Go ahead, Ms. Pete.
And one thing to consider, I know that you guys have requested these COVID updates and everything, but all of the declared emergencies are part of that. And so the earthquake and those lingering projects are also part of that deficit and fund balance. I think that the other two may be resolved at this time, but just so that everybody, it's in totality, not just the COVID situation. So maybe having that conversation robustly in a fund balance would be helpful.
And in that, if Madam Chair, please let's make sure then that we have an apples to apples conversation, because we just had a presentation that suggested don't expect when we're fully reimbursed by FEMA, we will not be back to zero or above where our 10 and 2. But I think that is more nuanced, that it's when we are fully reimbursed from FEMA for COVID. And so we would like to see as well the picture of what we're anticipating reimbursements, so that we can see the whole picture of the 10 and 2 and the fund balance, not just the siloed version. If we're going to talk whole, let's see whole.
Thank you. So then transitioning on the general theme of how much money do we have and what are we spending, let's move on. And then I'll also say we are noticed until 1:10. And so I want to try to leave 45 minutes for the investment discussion. So if we could get through this briefly. So go ahead, Ms. Peterson.
I'll make it very quick. The 2022 budget versus actuals are obviously not ready to be presented because our financials are not complete yet. And so until all of that movement and transactions are complete, we won't know what that ending picture looks like. For the 2023, we'll start presenting those at the next meeting next month. So you'll start seeing that half a year, and then every month after that, we'll show the progress through 2023. As we move forward, as part of that, we work with the departments on projections for the end of the year, so I can update you on any departments that may believe that they're going to run over or not. So that's kind of that conversation. You had sent out a list of questions outside of the agenda, and just on since alcohol tax is on there. The expectation is we do not have any available fund balance for the alcohol tax. When we did the 2023 revised budget, we gave at that time what was known based on where we were with the closing of 2022, what that available fund balance would be. And that was used as part of the revised budget and the amendments that were processed. And so the expectation is there is no remaining alcohol tax fund balance. And the revenues that are projected for 2023 are fully appropriated. And then for the revenues, they did go up slightly. Last year, we had budgeted roughly 15.4 million. We've seen that we had realized additional revenue from that at 16 million. And so the budget for 2023 is at 16 million. So that's 600,000 more than the budget from last year. So we already are projecting an increase and have budgeted for that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from folks? Okay, and that, I appreciate your confirming what my unofficial understanding was at the time, which is that it was all allocated, even though there were areas that were not spent. Yeah. Okay, so then let's move on to getting back to the, again, question of how much money do we have? What is the MOA financial status to Mr. Thurn and then also Mr. Moore?
Dan, do you want to just talk about that?
Sure. So through the chair to the committee, we're at a point in the year where we're not quite ready to provide a handout and show you numbers on paper because there just is not enough information that's been filed yet by, say, like hotels, as an example. They only file quarterly, or certain other revenues come in only once a year, like PFD, that type of thing. So, but we do have some sense of where revenues might head, just a little bit of an early indicator. I can say for room tax, we get informational monthly returns, and April was up 12% from the prior April. So that's a decent sign. I think the tourist season is expected to be strong. So that's one area. We did just bill property taxes. That's real property. And so we actually know how we're coming in on that. And we're probably going to be about $1 million short on real property tax. And that deals with the conversion to the new tax system and some issues with exemptions and how they were processed. So the estimate provided by the assessor was off a little bit mostly because of the exemptions and the new system. But overall, when I did sort of scan through all the major revenues, there's about 20 or 25 of them that make up 95% of all general government revenues. I don't see any early indicators of any big giant swings. Cash pool investments often can swing quite a bit. Last year, there were like minus $3 million. The current update on that is that it's on target within about $300,000 of budget. So if I were to scan through everything and say the pluses and the minuses, I think we're plus or minus $1 million this year. It's going to be pretty tight, which is a good thing. And that's at this point in time. I am going to be retiring at the end of the month, and Glenn Cipriano, who's the deputy treasurer, as well as Paula Reiswig, they're both in Treasury. They're going to sort of take the baton and be reporting to you in the future. So I've created kind of a baseline, and they're just going to update it month to month and let you know. But really, the most substantive update we're going to be able to give in terms of numbers is in August. That we'll have some good information there. Last thing I'll say is on alcohol, it is budgeted 16 million. We looked at the first 4 months of filings. It's totally on track with what we've budgeted. So we don't expect going beyond 16 million this year. And also with the financials being behind, as you all know, we literally only have 3% of our budgeted revenues showing up in SAP at this moment in time. We know more of what's coming, but it's not yet even posted. So there's a lot of just catch up that needs to occur in order for us to for everyone to literally see the full picture. So anyway, that's the update. Thank you.
Thank you. First, before I go to questions, I want to just remind folks, just again, so it's on the record, the property tax change that you indicated was, I think, Prop 12. Is that right? Or whichever one it was that increased the residential exemption.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
And so when folks were looking at their property tax bills, this happened to me personally, I did see a decrease in that because, because I own a smaller place. And again, it increased the allowed exemption from 50,000 to 75,000 or 20% of your home value to 40%. So most folks probably did see that, and just reminding folks that's why, and thank you to the voters for voting for that. And then I have a question, but I'll go to Mr. Constant first.
Thanks, Dan. Is it on the same timeline when we start to see the actuals report for departments and their expenses? Like, you said.
Yes,
next
that'd be
month-ish.
correct. Similar timeline, yes.
Okay, thank you, because that's a very valuable report.
Other questions from folks? Okay, not seeing any. My question was in terms of timing for basically the summer tourist season, because I hear you that, for example, hotels report quarterly. I assume that also means rental platforms like Airbnb that are collecting from hosts and things like that. So basically, at what month in the year could we potentially see basically whether there was any increase in these revenues by the end of summer tourist season, which I would say is like September 1st to September 15th?
Okay, through the chair. For room tax, the first real indicator of how the summer season is going will be the second quarter filing, and we will not have that information until after the 7-day grace period, which should be around the 8th or 10th of August. The third quarter filings won't be until November. So everything is, about 6 weeks after the end of the quarter. However, I will say Airbnb, which we cannot disclose specifically information about Airbnb, it's too proprietary, but they actually file with us starting this year monthly. So we have some really good information. They're a top tier provider of rooms, and so we know each month how they're doing, and so that's very helpful. We also, due to municipal code, require the largest hotels, it's about the top 25, to report to us on a monthly basis in between those quarters. So I quoted April being up 12%. We're going to know the May information return from those large hotels. We'll know that at the end of June. So, that's about as good as we can do in terms of knowing what's going on in the market. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'm just, again, flagging that for folks to think about. We're projecting a very strong tourist season. That's what the industry is telling us and common sense. And so I think it'll be interesting to see the delta in our revenues and if we do see an additional bump like we have the last couple of years. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's move right along and let's talk again about the MOA financial we're still on this. So now I think we're ready to move on to our main item. So I will again turn it over to Mr. Moore. And then just a reminder to members, this is an ordinance that is on our June 20th agenda. And it's something that is also the result of a successful ballot proposition that passed this year. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Moore.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So today we're going to spend the remaining time that you have in this committee to talk to you about the trust fund governance ordinance. It's an implementation ordinance. And what I have, or what I hope you all have, is a packet. It's a presentation packet. It's 16 pages long, but we have a real efficient way of going through that. So we're going to go through that. That'll be our primary deal. We also provided you with a copy of the ordinance. We provided you with a copy of the detailed investment consultant report, which has specific recommendations in it, and the Investment Advisory Commission resolution, which speaks to this whole process. So just to start out, and I'm going to speak from this presentation packet here, is I wanted to quickly introduce who's here that on the municipal side. So myself, Dan Moore, I'm the city treasurer. I've been with the trust fund since day one. So for 24 years, I've been the sole fiduciary on the trust fund. With me is Glenn Cipriano in the audience there. He is the deputy municipal treasurer. And you'll see later on when we speak, his position is designated to be the new trust manager, kind of taking over for the treasurer role internally. So it's a very important position. We hired Glenn in August, and he, for his specific investment knowledge, he's very, very experienced and knowledgeable about investments. So that's that. And then, of course, Alden is with us today as acting CFO. On the phone, we have Jim Voitko. He is the president of RVK. That's a nationwide independent investment consultant. They're based in Portland, Oregon. Jim is incredibly experienced in the investment world. not only as a consultant, but also serving as a lead investment executive over a $50 billion fund in Oregon. So he has a tremendous experience. He also has a lot of expertise in governance models for different types of investment funds around the country. He travels all over the country all the time and advising states, localities on their investment practices. So he is an excellent resource. He was here in person in January when we had our work session on the ballot ordinance. Okay. Also in the audience, we have Julie Farley. She's the current chair of the Investment Advisory Commission, and Jeff Sins, who you saw at the prior committee meeting. He was the last year's chair of this commission. So the commission has been extremely helpful to us as a resource. And then law department, Ben Bowman is here somewhere. Is Ben? So Ben Bowman's here, and also Jessica Willoughby. Wanted to thank both of them. They put a lot of work into our ordinance. So anyway, and he's here obviously for any type of legal questions. So I'm going to get into just quickly getting everyone caught up on the background really quickly, and then we're going to jump into.
So, Dan, this is Ross.
Oh, go ahead, Ross.
Yeah, you forgot me, Dan.
I did forget Ross. I apologize. Ross is part of this ordinance, and you'll see it. I definitely apologize. So Ross Risvold is the head of public finance, and his group oversees the municipal cash pool investments, and you'll kind of see how that's affected by this ordinance. So I apologize about that. Okay, so anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a very quick background and timeline, but super quick, because these are some materials that we provided to you last Thursday. And basically, we're just trying to catch everybody up and let you know there's a lot of work that's already been done on this. This actually started way back in July of last year, and it's kind of progressed through many, many different steps and hurdles. And we're really getting close to the end now with this final ordinance. So on page 2 and 3, this is just to show you what was presented to the voters. And with this, we received nearly 60% approval, which is quite strong. And this voter fact sheet basically gave you the background on the trust, the rationale for changing the governance model, and then what the actual ballot ordinance proposed to do. So the trust in general has grown tremendously over the years. It's many times greater than it was in the beginning. It's also much more complicated than it was in the beginning. And that's where there's a need to have a board of trustees, which is what was proposed. So the voters approved it. A part of that approval is it needs to be put in place within a year. We certainly won't want this thing to be put in place a lot quicker than a year. And it also says that the board has to operate in compliance with the Uniform Prudent Investor Act. That's a very formal act. We'll get to it in a moment. But that is very important for a fiduciary to kind of know what their boundaries are. So that's what they approved. And then I'm going to flip on to page 4. And on the timeline, and again, the key here is this started way back in July. RVK spent several months interviewing a host of people, doing lots of research, using their own knowledge that they have about governance. And they came up with a report. They issued it in mid-October of last year. And prior to their final report, they presented it to the finance department. They presented it to the commission through a series of meetings. That mid-October report is the report that has been the basis for everything that followed. So it helped us craft the ballot ordinance. And then at this stage, we're now to the implementation ordinance. So the box area there, that's today's meeting, June 15th. Just visually, you can see we are very far down the line here. This implementation ordinance is the big final hurdle. So once the assembly approves it, we can proceed with recruiting and presenting candidates for the board. That is the implementation ordinance it's very detailed. It's 29 pages, but our goal today is to give you the key highlights and hopefully give you a sense of comfort as to how this was created. But again, without approval of that ordinance, everything is stalled, and we really need the assembly support on this. Okay, so just to give you one more piece of background, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim Voitko. On page 5, we talk about the purpose and the intent of what we're doing with this implementation ordinance. And this is a direct excerpt from the assembly memorandum that you have. And I just highlighted in yellow some key points here. So the key here of what we're trying to achieve with this ordinance is to provide rules and direction for the brand new board that's going to be formed so that it has something to go by in their early years of operation. The key on early years of operation is we want a strong foundation. We want it solid. We want a lot of reasoning and rationale behind what we're putting down there. But we recognize that the board, once they get seated and they get experience with their operation, they could very well come back in a couple of years and say, you know, certain things aren't working for us. We want further definition. We want further flexibility, whatever. And our recommendation is, you know, form the board, let them operate for a couple of years, and then see what additional amendments are needed at that point. But because this is a fiduciary board, they need to be as empowered as possible to control their situation in terms of what they're responsible for. So that's our recommendation. In terms of who contributed to this ordinance, many different parties did. So obviously, Finance Department, that means CFO, Treasurer, Public Finance. RVK was the key in producing this report, or this ordinance. So they are the foundation, the source of foundation for all this. Investment Advisory Commission, many different regular and special meetings were involved for them to review and give comment. MOA Law spent a couple months helping us get to a final version of the ordinance. And then, of course, we briefed the top administration several times along the way to make sure that we were in conformance with what they were wanting to achieve. So in terms of the content of the ordinance, where did that come from? It's not arbitrary. It's not made up. It's not brand new. This is all good material that exists in the world, that's existed for a long time. So we are in Alaska, we're in Anchorage. We said, let's look locally to what we have. We have the Alaska Permanent Fund, very special fund. The trust fund is like the permanent fund. It's a mini permanent fund. The difference being we have one dividend paid out to the city to help offset the need for property taxes. So if you think of us as a mini permanent fund, and then we model after the Alaska Permanent Fund and their governance structure, they have a board of trustees. Their commissioner of revenue has a permanent seat on that board. They get paid stipend. They have regular meetings. They have similar investments. Very helpful to do that. So we literally plagiarized, scripted, whatever word you want to use, directly out of state statute and internal policies that they have to help us build the bulk of this content. In addition, the city also has a fund, a police and fire pension fund, which is another fiduciary board that's autonomous. They have a lot of power to do whatever they need to do to fulfill their role. That is in municipal code 3.85. That was very helpful to us also. So we use some of their language and some of their approach to fold into what we're proposing. In addition, there's other municipal codes that get triggered by forming a new board. So we made sure, working with law, that we covered all those bases. And of course, we did additional research as needed online with other investment boards across the country. So that's the background of how did this implementation ordinance get drafted. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Jim Voico. His bio is on page 6, and Jim is going to just give us his overall thoughts starting on page 7.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, Mr. Voico, just really briefly, I know this is a dense and technical topic, so I just want to pause for a second and see if there's questions from members, just so we don't get too far into it. Not because there needs to be questions, but okay, go ahead, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So my question is about RVK. Do they perform services for us on a regular basis? Are they on contract for service to the department?
Yes, they were selected through an RFP process, and they have a contract with various scope of service in the contract.
So this is no attempt to kind of cast any aspersions or anything. I just have to ask the question. We hire them to perform contract services for the department. They help draft or even guide a ballot proposition, which I think is well done and was the right thing to do. And then they're proposing the framework for how we implement the trust. Are they, practically speaking, kind of on both sides of the deal here in the context of contracts and keeping the boundaries clear? I don't know how the financial kind of services work, but it certainly raises the question of where do they fit, and could it be perceived that they're working on both sides?
Jim Voico can speak to this, but their business is strictly investment consulting. They are independent. They do not have other services that they provide. We hired them specifically as an investment consultant. And when they created their report, We literally had no contact with them whatsoever during the processing of their report. So I don't know if that helps.
So they don't provide investment management services.
Correct.
And we don't pay them for returns of any kind of that.
Correct.
nature. Okay, that helps. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so
If I could add,
go ahead, Jim.
If I could add that we actually created a separate team from the team of consultants that works to advise Dan as the fiduciary and the commission, number one. And number two is I can't think of a single thing in any of the, in either the charter or change or the ordinance in any way advantages our firm whatsoever. Because we're not an asset manager, strictly an advisor, somehow up there.
Yeah, that was what my mind was trying to grasp.
It's a good question.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, Ms. Bronca, and Mr. Voitka, we will get back to your presentation, just making time for questions. Go ahead.
No problem.
So I was looking at the B5, and maybe this was, so we're clear back on page 4. And, if this was on the ballot and it's unchangeable, but what struck me is this part that you might remove someone in A who pleads guilty or no contest to misdemeanor felony. Nobody pleads guilty anymore. It's all kinds of stuff going on. It's concerning to me that, everyone's going to say, no, I didn't do that. And I'm hoping that someone who was looked at in that way, there's more than them saying, yeah, I did it. That if we see that they've got something going on that looks bad, that we will take that seriously.
Yep. We'll defer to Ben Bowman, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Assemblyperson Bronca through the chair. So B5 is actually a point where there is more scrutiny on this board because they're a fiduciary than other boards. We built B5 to be even more robust than normal. Under normal boards, if a member can be removed under the provisions of AMC 4.05.065, which is we go through the ethics committee, they make recommendation to the Assembly of the Mayor, and a member might be removed. This board has not only that 4.05.065 procedure, but has additional reasons whereby the board members themselves can say, without they can trigger that ethics committee process. They can say, we think member Bowman has a problem. This is the reason for those problems, not a standard violation of the municipal ethics code, but this other specific thing. And we're referring this member to the ethics committee, to the assembly mayoral process for removal, not for a standard MOA version, but these additional things on top. So that's actually, we have a greater power to remove people who might be problematic from the board than we would on a normal board.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, and I'll recognize Mr. Constant, but also I'll maybe ask if we can hold questions on the content of the ordinance until after the presentation, but go ahead.
I agree, however, since this line was brought up, this isn't the charter language, this is code, right? Implementing the charter. So I think there 5A is problematic. It should say pleads or is found guilty, because it actually has a loophole there that if the court found them guilty, it wouldn't be removable under this current code. But we'll get into the fine details later.
Okay, other questions? Okay, yeah, and thanks folks for holding on the content. So go ahead, Mr. Voitka.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the assembly members for having me speak. I'm going to make just 5 quick points, but I hope that they're relevant to your deliberation. The first one is that as the governance advisor to the municipality, our team focused on several critical objectives. And first of all, I want to say that all of what we had in the report enriched substantially by the discussions with the commission, further discussions with the treasury staff and the fiscal staff were included and are included in this implementing ordinance. So we feel very good about that. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is that the governance structure that we recommended is really rooted in two things. One is that it should protect the trust. And we just had a conversation about how this ordinance actually raises the standards for removal precisely because it's overseeing a very precious asset for the municipality. So protection of the trust is critical, and it's a critical role of fiduciaries and trustees. And the other is to reflect its nature and purpose. And Dan spoke to that, and that this is very much like the permanent fund for the state. It's a perpetual asset for the citizens of Anchorage for years to come. So our report, and that is reflected in this ordinance, is infused with those two aspects of this particular financial asset. The third point I'd like to make is that if you look at our report, we talk about when we look at governance for a public fund, for a public set of financial assets, we're trying to strike a balance, a careful balance between the kind of independence that trustees as fiduciaries need to execute their duties to the trust fund, but also a measure of accountability to elected officials, not only the current ones, but future ones. And so as you read through the ordinance and as you read through our report, what you'll see are following items that essentially strike that balance. First of all, there's a 7-member board of trustees, and they are saddled with fiduciary responsibility. That is the highest level of responsibility that you can have in institutional investing. The second is that board members are selected by the mayor and approved by the assembly. That's on the other side of the coin in terms of accountability to the elected officials by the citizenry. The third item I would point out is that the CFO is granted an ex officio seat, a permanent one, so that there's always the head of the financial apparatus for the municipality is a permanent member of this board. So again, a link back to elected officials and their appointees and their senior appointees. The fourth item that you'll see is that a majority of the members are independent of the municipality. That's by design, and that strikes another side of the balance to ensure that that there's always an independent set of trustees that have a frame of mind that isn't attached to the current issues of the moment for the municipality, which, as you know, given your position, can change from year to year or even month to month. The fifth thing is that staggered terms was something that we recommended in our report and that is included in this proposal. And staggered terms are very commonly used for two purposes. One is to ensure continuity in the investment strategy, because continuity in the investment strategy of a large financial asset like the municipal trust is really very important to successful investing over the long run for the citizens. And it also happens to, again, weigh in on the side of a measure of independence for this board, in the sense that their board members, the independent board members, can't be replaced wholesale at any given point in time. And again, that strikes this balance that we are strongly recommending to the municipality and to you as the assembly. We also, you'll see in our report and in this ordinance, that we empower the board, and you would empower the board to approve this, to retain advisors and asset managers that they deem necessary to execute their fiduciary duties to the trust. This is an extremely common practice across all fiduciary bodies that oversee financial assets. And so again, it stands on one side of this balance, this seesaw, if you will, between accountability and independence and empowerment. They are also empowered, as trustees are across the board in institutional investing, to make the investment decisions that they feel best serve the long-term interests of the trust. If this is a perpetual trust, the investment decisions have to have forward vision associated with them. And this would, by approving this ordinance, you would be helping to ensure that that was the case. The final thing in this balancing is that we recommended in our report, and this is part of this proposal, that there be obligations for reporting by these trustees, including the majority of that are independent, that ensure that every one of the board's actions are transparent to the executive branch, to the assembly, and to the public at large. These points that I just made, we think, in our expert opinion, we hope it's an expert opinion, strike a very good balance between this issue of accountability to you as elected officials, but also the independence necessary for fiduciaries to do their job. I'll move on to the fourth point, because I want to move quickly, and it's an important one, and Dan mentioned it earlier. And that is that not almost all public funds at this point are governed, and the fiduciaries who make the investment decisions for them are governed by the Uniform Prudent Investor Act. It is the gold standard for assessing fiduciary duty and empowerment, as a matter of fact, on fiduciaries. By adopting this and embedding it in the ordinance, you are essentially aligning your ordinance with what we consider and what apparently institutions across the United States find to be the gold standard for guiding and governing fiduciary behavior. And the last thing that we would say, the fifth major point, is that you are so fortunate as a municipality to have this very special and probably irreplaceable financial asset intended for the perpetual benefit of the citizens of Anchorage. And we strongly recommend that this board manage it to achieve intergenerational equity. And that phrase, what that phrase means is that that all generations of citizens, and in this case, homeowners, given the purpose of the fund, now and into the future, should have an equal opportunity to benefit from this very special asset. And that's part of our recommendation. And obviously, we feel very good about the proposed ordinance that's in front of you. We think it is a best practices laden proposal. We don't have a vote in this, we shouldn't, but I will say that having worked on these types of projects across the country, and in fact, I'm in the center of the lower 48 right now, working on a very similar one. This one would stand up to scrutiny no matter who or when that scrutiny might be applied to it. So with that, Madam Chair and members of the Assembly, I'll step back, and I'm prepared to answer questions, or we can hand it back to Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Questions from members? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Bowman.
I just want to clarify one point because it's come up multiple times in our discussions throughout preparing this ordinance. And it's Jim's third point is the CFO holding an ex officio seat. I just want everyone to understand that that is a fully participating seat. There'll be a voting member. There'll be a member for purposes of quorum. Under our code, it's not, but they hold the seat as the CFO. And
just to enter it in the record, I said that under my breath. That's not what ex officio means. And Mr. Bowman replied, so go ahead.
Yeah, and Mr. Constant, you are correct. Under our code, there is board members, generally conceptualized an ex officio member is a non-participating member. This would be a participating member who holds their seat on the board by dint of their position with the municipality. So whomever the CFO is will automatically be on this board. That's what we mean by it's the legal definition of ex officio as opposed to the municipal code definition of ex officio. But yeah, there'll be a voting member, there'll be a member for quorum, all those things. They're 1/7.
Okay, other questions for Mr. Boyko? Because I think there is desire to talk about the content of the ordinance, so I just want to make sure that we're not missing any other presentation pieces. Ready to go?
We can keep proceeding if you're ready.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, so Jim Voico's points were on page 7. Page 8 just gives you a few highlights of the Uniform Prudent Investor Act. So it basically provides an approach on managing investments such as the MOE Trust. I won't cover that just in the sake of time, but it's right there for you as a quick summary. Okay, so we're going to start talking about the ordinance itself. And to start, and we're going to go from a high level down to a deeper level, drill down. So on page 9, what I'd like to point out is there's various roles that have existed for many years that are now going to change with the passage of this ordinance. The first is the Investment Advisory Commission. That's a 9-member citizen-based commission, very highly talented, knowledgeable individuals. That commission will go away once this new board is seated and operational. So that is in play. The Investment Advisory Commission primarily oversees the MOE Trust Fund. They also spend some time each meeting getting updates on the municipal cash pool. That overview with the cash pool will go away. There are other methods to monitor and to use investment consultant to keep on top of the cash pool. So with the commission going away, the current duties they have also would go away. The Board of Trustees is another role, a brand new role that would be formed. And their focus, their singular focus would be on the MOA Trust Fund. And they would look to oversee it and to manage it and to make key decisions, which then the trust manager would execute based on the board's authority. So that's one of the new roles is the formation of the board. They replace the commission. And the key is the commission was 9 members of citizen members. This is going to be 7 members, and it's going to be a mix of both external and internal. So that's a change. And as Jim Voico just pointed out, the majority of this new board is actually going to be external members. So that is something different. This is a voting board, a fiduciary board, the highest standard. The Investment Advisory Commission was strictly advisory. So there's a huge, huge difference there. We are hoping that some investment commission members may actually put their name in the hat. We've asked them to consider that. And so it's possible there could be some that are willing to do that. But it is a big step going from being on advisory to being a fiduciary. It's a huge, huge, huge decision for anyone. So, and then the board itself fully replaces the decision authority that the municipal treasurer had since inception. So instead of one person, myself, making decisions, final decisions on the trust, it's going to be a board of 7 that make these decisions in the future. The chief fiscal officer, Ben Bowman, just already referred to that as his or her special role on the board, voting member by virtue of their position. The treasurer position, which is my current position, is not going to be on the board as not a candidate to be on the board, and is actually not going to be as involved in the day-to-day internal support of the trust fund. However, the municipal treasurer, whoever that future person is, will be expected to fill in for the CFO if that position is ever vacant, and it'd be a temporary fill-in. And as a result of that, we would expect that treasurer to attend all board meetings, so they are always ready to serve if needed. So we want, like Jim Voico said, continuity of this fund is extremely important. And it's not just having people show up at meetings, it's have the continuity of knowledge. A lot of these investments take a long time to play out. And if you were there in the beginning and you're there years later, you have a really true full understanding of each of those investments and why the decision was made and if the decision is working out. So the trust, the treasurer would be a backup to the CFO if needed, and would also be a secondary signer if there were needs to move money or that type of thing. They would coordinate with the trust manager and be a secondary signer. Okay, and then the deputy municipal treasurer, which is Glenn Cipriano. That person is a high level, it's a range 18 non-represented position. That was specifically designed so that in a change of administration, that's not an executive position. It's not one that potentially is out the door. This is one that would sustain between administrations. It also is one where we hired specifically for the skill set, the knowledge and skill set. And that's very important when you're talking about trying to oversee the trust fund. And so this person, this trust manager position is now basically anytime you saw in code, municipal treasurer does, A through Z, Now it's the trust manager that does A through Z. And this code, the proposal we put forward, actually lists all the different duties that we could think of that this trust manager would need to follow. Okay. All right, so we're going to go on to
Sorry, if I
page
could-
12 or 10, and I'll pause just for a moment there.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question, and I guess I'll also just emphasize again, right now, one person, you specifically,
Yeah.
is overseeing the millions and millions of dollars that we have, right? And so the idea, again, just generally is that it's better to have more people doing that, and it's better to have clear rules and clear roles outlined for them. Okay, Mr. Constant, go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. So on page 10, like you're saying, we're just going to go there. It says the controller is authorized to perform the duties of the CFO in their absence, but you said the treasurer. Where is the language of the treasurer being the number 2?
Ben Bowman can maybe help find that. I don't think there's any specification of the controller. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
it's line 41.
And Mr. Constant, you're referring to the ordinance, not the summary that we're looking
Yeah,
at.
yeah.
Page 10 on the ordinance.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
page 10 on the ordinance. Okay, just a moment.
It says the controller, and I don't imagine the controller and the treasurer are the same person.
Can you point me to where?
Yeah, it's line 41 to 44.
41.
The controller's office. So basically the CFO's office says the controller, and that's what code says.
10.
Okay, that is, okay, I see. That is for things that are not related to the trust. This chapter that you're looking at is for the municipal cash pool. And so it's separate. It's a department head. A municipal code says the controller can be the default for the CFO unless otherwise designated. But for the trust, the default, it's written into this new code, the default is the treasurer.
Could you point me to that place?
Sure. And do you see where that is, Ben?
Thank you.
I'll find that real quickly for the audience, but I think it might be helpful if we went through Dan's next page of the presentation, because it lays out the different sections of the ordinance and what they do. And this is the section that we're talking about right now is one that reworks how the CFO's duties in general function, since we're getting rid of the Investment Advisory Commission. It does not deal directly with the newly formed Trust Fund Advisory Board. But Assemblyperson Constant, I will find the delegation, the auto delegation.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I also just want to state, so we have about 15 minutes left in our meeting, but I also want to remind members, because I just remembered myself, that we have a work session on this ordinance after that. So I guess I'll suggest, in the interest of time, that we do an informational outline of what's in there. And then if folks can hold their questions for about 25 minutes or so, and then we can dig in and especially discuss some of the questions or issues people have, just in terms of time management, if that sounds good. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead,
so,
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm on page 10. Again, what we did to sort of help guide the discussion here, we took an exact excerpt from the Assembly memorandum, and this the memorandum shows the summary of each of the sections. There's 5 sections in the ordinance, and we highlighted in yellow just really the kind of the key elements of each section. So section 1 eliminates the Investment Advisory Commission. Section 2 is the bulk of the content. So if you were to really give your focus, it would be in section 2. And this talks about the formation of the board and all the different rules, standards, and et cetera. So that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. Section 3 basically just says that any new board member has to take an oath of office. That's in line with other boards. Section 4 is some technical changes to the cash pool cash pool management. It also says the Investment Advisory Commission no longer needs to perform oversight of that cash pool. The most significant change in section 4 is the introduction of the trust manager who replaces the role of municipal treasurer, and it delineates that person's duties in quite a bit of detail. Section 5 basically just says what is the effective date, and it's all triggered upon whenever the new board can be formed. Okay, I'm going to go on to page 11. And this is the highlights. We looked through this whole ordinance and thought, okay, what do we think the assembly definitely should make sure you know about? So we describe it here section by section. We reference page numbers, and in parentheses, you'll see this specific element in that code, so you can go right to that exact wording if you need to. So I'm going to start at the top of page 11. I'm just going to deal with subsection B as in Bravo of section 2. It's on pages 2 through 4. So the key highlights here, it's a 7-member board, majority of which are external, and we use an asterisk mark there, and we quote out of RVK's report about the importance of having a majority of members be external. I'm not going to read that quote, but it's there for you. The second bullet here of a major highlight is that there will be, and according to the code, there will be not only a standard background check for board members, but also one that deals with anything related to the financial industry. This would be publicly available information. There's a group called FINRA, there's SEC, there might be other bodies. We would perform a search on any prospective appointee to see if there's anything in their past that would be important for you all to know in terms of considering appointment. The third is the CFO on the board. We've already talked about that. The fourth is the stub terms. So everyone doesn't just start out with a full term. It's stubbed, it's staggered, so that there is kind of a filtering in of new members, and then there's a rolling off in a staggered way over the years. Instead of having this is the next bullet, instead of 3-year terms, we've made it 4-year terms. That's also trying to promote the continuity of knowledge of the board members. And we also have, and this is the next bullet, a provision where we would allow a person to have a stub term or to fill out some other partial term, but once they do 2 full terms, 2 consecutive 4-year terms, at that point, they would be, off the board according to code, and they could come back later, like years later, as long as they take a 4-year break. So we know there's a lot of value in some members, and but we also know there's value in new blood, new ideas, and we just want to give opportunity to other people to serve on this board. So there is a term limit, but it's not a forever term limit if there's a really valuable person that wants to come back years later and do a second cycle. So the last one we talked about, last bullet, is the removal. It does require 3/4 vote on the board to recommend removal, and then it goes to that standard process that's already specified in municipal code. So that's section 2 or subsection B. I can keep going for time purposes. Is that okay? Or
Yeah, I guess
Okay.
if there's quick clarifying questions, we can entertain those, but I think,
okay.
yeah, we'll save the rest of the discussion.
Okay, so subsection C is in Charlie. This is on pages 4 through 7. These are the powers and the duties of the board. The bullets here, the first, and this is very important, Jim Voico referenced this several times. The board is granted broad powers to fulfill their fiduciary duty. That is very, very necessary. If there's too much interjection of outside parties like, oh, we want you to do this, we want you to do that, that is an interference of fulfilling that fiduciary duty. They have to be independent. They have to be empowered in order to do that. And fiduciary is a very high legal standard. So it's not just words. It's a very real thing. And that's where the Uniform Prudent Investor Act comes into play. The second bullet, we talk about a stipend. We had quite a bit of discussion about this. People's time is valuable, and where their expertise is what we're trying to get. So we did some research. We found out that the permanent fund pays $400 per meeting. I wasn't aware of that. We know that the police and fire pension fund also pays per meeting. It's a lower amount that hasn't been adjusted in a long time. It's about $100. So we picked $300 as a reasonable amount of money that will then encourage full preparation in advance of the meeting and just a stronger commitment amongst the members. We think that can have some real positive effect. The third bullet is municipal attorney's office. This is municipal money. It's the MOA trust fund. It doesn't belong to like a 401k participant or something like that. This is municipal money. And because of that, we do not want this new board to just go hire their own attorney and just go off and do various things and not have the municipal attorney involved. They could still hire a specialized attorney, and they very well may need to in the future, but they need to first go through the municipal attorney and kind of vet that with them. And so that's an important requirement that we maintain in this ordinance. The next one is the board and the trustees are deemed fiduciaries, and it's specifically stated, according to what the voters approved, they shall perform according to Uniform Prudent Investor Act of 1994. In the charter ballot ordinance that the voters approved, the assembly wanted to keep that reference generic, not say the of 1994. In code, we get very specific as to which act it is. It has not changed since 1994. It's a very, very solid piece of work. The last two bullets, the board is empowered, authorized to establish their own internal policies and practices as needed. And this is very, very common with any type of fiduciary investment board. And then last is the specific responsibilities of the CFO. We want to make sure, just like with the trust manager, that we list some responsibilities that the CFO has in serving on the board. And there are some additional duties or responsibilities to make sure that finance department resources are fully available to the board to make sure the work gets done. So that's specifically written in code. Okay, go ahead.
One quick clarifying question or statement, or if you can confirm, the 300 per meeting, it looks like in the ordinance, you're saying external board members, so those are not the
Correct.
Muni employees,
Yeah, I
right?
should- I
So we're
should
not
clarify
paying
that.
Muni
Yeah,
employees to
you
do
have
that.
to be external to be able to get that.
Okay,
And then
thank you.
a member can also say, I don't want the stipend. The board could change the policy, and they can't go higher than 300. So it's yep. Okay, and then let's see, a subsection D is in Delta. This is under section 2, pages 7 through 8, talking about operation and communication. The board is going to be required by this code to advertise their meeting, to provide notice 7 days in advance. We want to make sure there's plenty of advance notice before they hold a meeting. There is a provision for an emergency meeting if needed, but that is not expected to be a recurring thing. That's only if they had a major issue with, say, a money manager. The CFO is ineligible to serve as a chair. We want this board to be balanced, to be lots of different perspectives, and we felt that the CFO as chair is probably not serving that objective as we would want. The board chair duties, the board chair is a very important position. It's elected by the board itself. Those duties and requirements, it's a long list, and it's very comparable to what the trust manager has. And the board chair and the trust manager are required to coordinate on a regular basis. Okay. Subsection E, ECHO, is on page 8. This talks about monitoring, reporting, and annual expense appropriation. So we know transparency is very important so that the public and the assembly know what's happening with the trust. And so we serve that transparency objective first and foremost by having a dedicated public web page. There's some samples of the web page in the further pages in our packet. And that is something we've had for quite a long time. And I think when you look at that web page, you'll see there's a tremendous amount of information there that we keep current, and we would expect this new board to continue on with that. The second bullet is the board would be required, as is the current practice, to provide an annual detailed report to the assembly and the mayor. It's a jointly addressed report that talks about how is the trust doing, what was the prior year performance, what's on the horizon, any new changes in money managers, et cetera. Okay, so that's a continuing requirement. And also the last one, just as it has been historically for the trust under the treasurer, the board would be required to submit a not to exceed annual appropriation document to the assembly for your approval. And in that document, they would need to break down how they anticipate the expenses, including board specific expenses like the stipend, to be incurred in the year that they're in. So that would be a requirement each year to make sure the expense authority is there. And I'm flipping the page now to page 12, and the last piece of section 2 is subsection F. There's a standard liability protection. This is very important for any prospective members on this board to know that the city will indemnify them if they operate in basically the middle of the road as a fiduciary and they don't go off the road with what they're doing. So that is an important provision that's kind of a make or break for certain prospective members. So it's good that it's in there. The section 4 is the remaining section that has significant highlights. We already talked about the investment commission is deleted when it comes to the cash pool. The CFO is required in this new code to always have the services of an independent investment advisor to provide guidance and advice on the municipal cash pool. So that is the outside look that pool will continue to have. Section 4 is the subsection A under definitions. The definition of annual dividend is essentially the same, except it does require that the annual dividend amount, there's a requirement that the board concur with that. So it cannot be just chosen by some outside, I guess it'd be the assembly in this case, say, we want X dollars or X percentage each year. The board would have to basically say, yes, we support that. And that's important because they're the most knowledgeable about what is sustainable in terms of a payout from the trust. Section 4, subsection A, page 21, the other definition is a trust manager. It's very specific as to which person is deemed trust manager, and that's the deputy municipal treasurer. So that's in there to make sure that's very clear. And then the last is subsection F, as in Frank. This basically updates the various authorities that the trust would be managed under, and it delineates the responsibilities and duties of the trust manager. And these basically are replacing whatever the treasurer was doing previously. And the delineation of these duties now exists in this current code, and it didn't actually exist before. So this is an improvement. It's a strengthening of saying what that key internal person is required to do. So that is the highlights of the ordinance itself. Page 13 is a visual of the terms and how stubbed and staggered terms would work. And you can see by the colors and the year timing, there's a lot of continuity built in there. Pages 14 and 15 are just a current snapshot of the Trust Fund webpage. You can always get to the Trust Fund website, just MOA Trust, Google it. It's the first hit no matter what, so we're really lucky that way. There's a section here called What's New. All the information we've done on governance is under that What's New section. So that's all there. And that's it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. And also thank you to everybody who's been working on this for such a long time. And I know it's a lot of content, but we'll have another hour to discuss. So I guess I'll see is there any other comments on this subject before we move on? Okay, and of course we'll be coming back to this very shortly. So thank you again. And I know we're right at our time, so I'll just see, is there any other business that we need to cover? None. Okay, and I'll also ask, is there any members of the public who'd like to speak? Or anyone on the phone? Okay, not seeing anybody come forward, so thank you again. I will reiterate our desire and request and need to see our 2022 financials as soon as possible, as we know, and otherwise we will adjourn this meeting. And then just to say, we will have a work session starting in about 10 minutes, again, on this same subject. So thank you, everyone. We're adjourned. Or move to adjourn. Okay.